All right. Well, welcome everybody. This is the first installment of our Light Switch podcast. I may edit this later and change it to a different name, but for now, this is the first installment. Today, we have a super special guest, Brian Lee. He has joined us. He's going to be our very first guest on the podcast. Here on Light Switch, what we're trying to do is highlight journeys and stories of really interesting professionals here who have made career changes or done some type of job switch. And hopefully you guys can learn a little bit more about their industry, their role, but also take a little bit of learnings about how they went about making that switch. And one thing I really like about Brian's story is he went from a lot of different roles. He had like operations roles and some product roles into a product manager now. And he didn't have to go back to school and get an MBA. And so I thought Brian would be a super valuable first participant for us. So thank you so much, Brian. I'll kick it over to you and you can kind of walk us through your origin story of kind of how you got to where you are now.
Sure. Thanks, Corey, so much for having me. I'm so honored to be your first guest. That's pretty cool. It's never happened to me before. In terms of my origin story, one of my first product mentors even told me, and he brought me in to hit one of his classes that he was teaching. He's like, I want to show you this guy's trajectory because it's totally unconventional. And that's like for most people, right? Product management is something you accidentally jump into, whether by choice or sometimes involuntarily. But it's a pretty weird, eclectic mix of traits and skills that you have to work with. So like our mutual friend, Albert from Albert's List, I graduated college during a recession. I really didn't know what to do, right? And I didn't really have a choice. So I dabbled in everything from being like, and this is totally irrelevant to my product career, but like working in hotels, selling vitamins through MLM, which some people would frown upon, but I still tell people today, even Albert included, that doing that actually put me out there, like reading body language, doing sales pitches, trying to have more empathy for the people that might use your product, and also like crafting a story behind it.
That was like direct to consumer marketing and sales, right? Like you're like knocking on people's doors.
Well, no, you don't have to knock. It's more like warm referrals. So
Got it.
like you might have cold calls that are directly like that. Like, but generally what we try to do is when you are introduced to like someone you work with, and without getting into too much detail, you ask them to do a warm intro, see if they're open to an opportunity, right? Same thing when, in sales prospecting, when you're trying to see like, where are they, like, what's the temperature of the room? Like, are they looking for this kind of software solution, or what are the problems that they're trying to solve? Which does tie into product, right? The first thing we always talk about in product management is what's the problem you're trying to solve? Mm-hmm. So gauging that is usually the first step towards a conversation, and it can go from there.
Right. It's like your customer research pseudo training.
Exactly.
Almost.
Yeah. So as I was learning more about customer discovery, like on the job or from the boot camp that I eventually went to, that part came pretty naturally to me. But there's a little bit more technicality behind that, like how do you design a survey and all that other stuff.
And what was your undergrad degree in? Just so if folks are trying to follow your path, it sounds not even linear, right? So what did you graduate with? What was your official degree?
A BA in music with an emphasis in music management.
Whoa, okay.
Yeah.
Music and music management. And then the first job immediately out of school was which one?
First, like, I did do a small stint with, what would you call them? I know the company name, George P. Johnson. They're like live event marketing. So when you do giant trade shows like a Dreamforce, I think they're one of the partners there. So they put on these live events, right? Like global, like lots of live events. And what was interesting about that, so I had a lot of operations and customer support there, was it was actually pretty relevant today. It was the very first Cisco WebEx trade show. I forgot what it was called, but it was like for salespeople, and it was all virtual, but not as interactive as it is today, where you have Zoom, right? And because the video quality was terrible, you'd have like little AIM style chat rooms going on, like, hey, what's this? And like, you would help or for me, it was, I was troubleshooting the support in different languages, because I speak Mandarin as well.
Oh, okay.
So they hired me for that, like English and Mandarin. And I just told them, hey, restart your computer, clear your cache and cookies most of the time, but it was kind of like, how do you get them to interact with this whole webinar trade show experience? So ironically, it's pretty relevant to today's situation where it's like we can't be in the same room. But they were trying to save money at that time because, you know, during the session, it was expensive to put on events, just as it is now.
Okay.
Yeah.
So graduated with a BA with music, and then went into like an operation customer service type role.
Yeah,
And then after
couple
that
of those.
was your marketing, sales, and then after that, where did you go?
This is where it gets a little crazy and all over the place.
But this is good though, because I feel like, so one thing before we even keep going that I just want to highlight to everyone listening is there's transferable skill sets that I can see Brian is building from each of his different jobs. And I'm going to try and call them out when I can see them in terms of how they relate to product management. But just for folks listening as to like, why would I want to know what Brian did in whatever order? Because not like you need to follow his exact career path, but it's going to give you really good ideas of like creative ways to get relevant skill set in a non-traditional fashion. Everyone always thinks if I want to be a product manager, I have to get a project management certificate, or I have to get a associate PM role first, or I have to get like an engineering degree. I'm going to go to a boot camp. So I'm going to try and highlight certain ways where Brian was able to get this experience without having to do all that. So.
And I'm willing to chime in on that as well.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, I'll try to make sense of all of it. There is actual some sense to all of this, and there's a method to the madness, right?
Yeah.
So after that, I was brought on, there's a connection of mine that said, hey, I have this agricultural project in Vancouver where I'm trying to teach people sustainable agriculture. Would you come up here and, because she was willing to pay me good money. I'm like, okay. So I did that. It didn't take off, and this is where I'm getting to it. When I was there, we had about 15 acres of land, like a very small plot of land. I had to take some classes on learning this method of agriculture called permaculture, which is like using the resources you have on the earth to pretty much lean, right? Taking lean resources and utilizing them to their highest yield or extent to grow crops and teach people how to do that and replicate it. In that whole experience, that was my first interaction with how to work with engineers to build an app. Because we had a lead farmer who wasn't necessarily technical, but he knew what to do. So I gathered requirements from that and helped him build like an iPad app to inventory the animals that we had, like sheep, goats, chickens, etc. Where did you have them like graze, like the plots of land, like the grass or whatever? Because we used animal tractors. We didn't want to use tilling machines and whatnot. So we would map it out. And I had to work with an engineer to build it because neither he or I could code. And this is way before I could write a given user story or product requirements. But it was the first time I realized, like, I know more about some aspects of design than I give myself credit for, right? And I used that same app later on as part of my interview processes, the boot camp I went to called General Assembly. They're well known for software development. They have a few other programs like design. And back in the day, this is early 2015, I was in the first cohort of their product management immersive, which is like a 10-week program, 40 hours a week plus, pretty heavy boot camp, and we would have projects. And I interviewed with that app and I said, hey, I still have it on FileMaker Pro here to demo to you, which was pretty neat because most people can say that they did it, right? And through that experience, I met a lot of people from different walks of life, like people who went from running a Whole Foods or whatever to people straight out of college to people who've done sales, right? Or even people who've worked at Google in some fashion and product. And what helped me realize through that whole process is that, everyone has a different background, but there's a common set of traits that a product manager should have. And one is the soft skill aspect, right? Where you can empathize with your users, right? That you're trying to solve a problem for, your stakeholders, like people you either report to or like your customers or even your team, right? And there's a lot of this, what we call, it's like cross-functional team stakeholder management, right?
Yep. Yeah, which is big, right? Because
It's
as a product
huge.
manager,
Yeah.
you're basically like coordinating everything. It's
Yeah.
almost like a project management role because it's kind of awkward, right?
It
Because no
is.
one
Yeah.
technically reports to you, but you still need them to get stuff done for you. So
Yeah.
I feel like that's where the soft skills really, really make a big
Yeah.
difference.
Um, I so there's nothing wrong with project management. I feel like that's a very slim layer of the whole cake, right? That's like one tier, which is the execution piece. And that's something that, you know, when you first get into product, it's more execution. You already, well, in my case, I did not have a product manager that I reported to. Like I was literally PM1 or like PM number 6 out of a group that had no vision yet because we didn't hire the head of product. But I've learned from very skilled and insightful people that have guided me to this day. Sometimes you throw the kitchen sink, sometimes you experiment in an agile process to figure out what works and what doesn't work, and you reflect. And that's essentially how we work. It isn't really rocket science, but we have to figure out a way to work with people effectively. And I know that I'm self-aware enough to know that's one of my skill sets, right? We talk about the importance of soft skills. Well, back then it was more technical, right? I always feel that you can learn those technical skills because I don't give myself enough credit. I actually know more than I give myself credit for, but I still wouldn't feel comfortable touching, you know, the code base, for example.
Hmm.
It's still something that I wouldn't necessarily want to do because that wasn't my core competency. There are other PMs I know trying to, you know, lay out the lay of the land here. There are those who are technical who start out as engineers and then pivoted into that. There are those who are design oriented, sales oriented, etc. I'm more of a business PM. And ironically, all those different domains I mentioned earlier, from working in a hotel to like um, that agricultural project or whatever, or even I also invested in a few other startups or little things like restaurants or whatnot. Um, all those domain expertise actually has helped me in my current job with San Francisco Digital Services, which is a team within the city and county of San Francisco. We're like a little, I don't want to call ourselves special ops, but more or less like special ops digital services teams that tries to implement and evangelize agile practices to build end-to-end software for the residents of San Francisco.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I work primarily in the permitting aspect. So when it came to business permitting, one of the first projects that I had to do like a user journey map for is restaurant permitting. And I knew a lot
Oh,
about
that's
setting up a
perfect.
restaurant, right? And I never thought I would use that again, right? But what's interesting is all these startups now have some niche. Like if you're in hospitality, if you know that pretty well, Airbnb, right? If you're in the restaurant community, you can do, depending on the takeout, right? Uber Eats, DoorDash, right?
And this is super cool because I feel like we kind of glanced over this fact, but we should probably mention Brian
Mm-hmm.
used to own a restaurant in Singapore.
Yeah.
Okay.
I wasn't there day to day. I worked behind the scenes, like from here, and I travel a couple of times and talk to my partners. Um, so I wouldn't give myself that credit, but it's just that insight of knowing like what were the obstacles that we faced in terms of getting it set up. How do you do, competitive analysis? How do you make your value proposition more what's enticing about it? Like, it's great that you're a first mover. We were the first to make this Cajun seafood boil restaurant, and eventually, it becomes an open landscape where there are more competitors with bigger budgets, right? So how do you compete there? So it made me think a lot about business and like, how do you expand to the next phase of it, right? How do
I,
you grow? How do you scale?
I just love like Brian's background and how he like jumped around from everything but got skill sets but also like I just think it's cool that he used to own a restaurant and it wasn't even in that country. That's just crazy. That's
I
crazy.
wouldn't advise it. I really would not advise it because laws, and then also you're not there day to day, right? But that's a story for another time.
Were you doing that full time while doing another job?
I would say part time. We
Part
did
time.
check-ins like once or twice a week, and then it became 2 weeks, and then like I would, because that agricultural project I told you about. Luckily, I was able to work remotely with
Okay.
pretty liberal hours. Like as long as I got my work done, right, I could travel and be in another country, a different time zone.
Okay.
Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, it was
So
yeah. I got lucky there.
So from the agricultural project, you did the PM, we'll call it boot camp, and then after you finished.
Sorry, no. After I got out of the agricultural thing and the restaurant business, that's when I decided, hey, I need. Oh, sorry. I know this is a pre-conversation that you and I just had. So I'm trying to jot my memory here. I realized that, these things are great. And, I wanted to figure out, career trajectory, because I knew it was all over the place, right? Like, what's the story behind this?
And how old were you at this point?
Mid-20s. No, not mid-20s. 27, maybe 28.
27, 28. Okay.
Yeah.
So for those of you who are listening, who are like, oh, I'm too old to make a career switch. Look, Brian was like, he was already working for 5-6 years at this point, and he still didn't technically know what he would be happy doing. So, I always tell everyone, all my clients, right? Like, it's never too late, assuming you have the financial stability to like pivot and switch. So yeah, just want to call that out. Brian's a great example. So keep going. So you're 27.
I was 27. I realized that one, it's like, what's the story I want to tell, right? And I thought to myself, being an entrepreneur is great, but I want to dabble in something else. I want a different challenge. And tech became something that I was more inclined to because of that, building that app for that agriculture, project. I was like, oh, this seems interesting. And I realized as I was doing some soul searching that what's some way I can get in there, right? But I realized I never worked for a startup yet. So I had to humble myself in order to get from one place to another.
Super important is humility. Very, very important. Okay, now I hate interrupting, but I feel like people are going to get a lot of value out of this. When you said you did some soul searching, I feel like this is a very pivotal point in your entire career when you have figured out ultimately that tech and product management is what you wanted to do and pursue, because it does take a lot of investment, money, but also time, right, to make those steps to eventually become a PM. So how did you soul search? Because there's a lot of people who are like, Corey, I'd hate my job, but I don't know what I would do instead. So how did you, what was your soul searching? Give people some insight from that.
I appreciate that, Corey. So in terms of soul searching, and it seems so logical to me, but I write down, what am I good at? Right. And these are things that you might discredit the fact that these are important skills, but others don't see that, right? Because you're in your head all the time. And I knew that I was good at problem solving. I was pretty much a generalist, right? Like, PMs can be generalists in general. We don't have a design trait or engineering technical aptitude. I like business. I liked challenges. I liked working with different people. And what I did, and this is where I'm getting to right now, is that I started talking to people, right? I'm like, what do you do for a living? It's like, oh, you're a product manager. And a friend of mine from high school, she was a PM, but she was originally a journalist by trade who transitioned into PM, working for a journalism startup, right? And there is opportunity there because she now works at Vox Media in New York. So it's pretty big, right?
Yeah.
But those happenstance stories where I was like, I was at the right place at the right time in my career, and she showed up on my Facebook feed. I'm like, oh, what's she up to? It's like, hey, what is being a product manager like? It's like, well, it's kind of like this and this. I'm like, how'd you get into it? Right. And then
so you literally just DM her on Facebook. Are you like commented on the picture, or you liked it and you were like, hey,
her, a few other people. And then, she told me, I was like, oh, that seems interesting. How do I get in the product at late 2014, early 2015? I'm like, how do you do this? Right. Everyone, from what I could tell at that time, was like, you need to get an MBA. I'm like, well,
that's what everyone says, right? Or go to a boot camp.
That is a way. There's an answer that most PMs will give you for any situation. Do you know that answer? It's a 2-word answer.
It depends.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's just like I have a management consulting background, so it was like, how many management consultants does it take to plug in a light bulb?
Yeah.
It depends.
Exactly. So it's it depends situation, right? If you do want to work for a FANGs company, I'm not saying it's impossible, but the curve is a lot harder.
Barrier to entry is just
Yeah,
naturally higher for like top tier
yeah,
companies in any industry. But
exactly.
basically, Brian was just DMing people on Facebook, guys. Like, come
Yeah,
on. There's almost no excuses as to like I don't know how to make connections. I'm shy.
yeah,
I'm introverted. Right? Brian was just commenting on photos or like people changing their status and stuff. So
yeah,
shoot your shot, honestly.
yeah.
Do you remember what you specifically said? Like, do you have any like secret scripts that you know would work when you were like reaching out to random
Sure.
people?
Uh, when I was actually looking for jobs, or just like when I
Either,
was just doing discovery?
either. Yeah,
Okay.
give
They're
both.
pretty similar. Uh, the biggest thing I always tell people, and I always wait to see if they do this. So this is there's one takeaway from this whole talk today, it's this.
Oh, here we go, guys. Everyone listen in. I'm sitting up for this. I'm sitting up for this.
Okay. Don't make it about you. It's as simple as that. See how you can help them. I know that you might be in this position where you don't feel like you can help somebody, but there are indirect ways to go about this where it's like, hey, I'm really interested to learn about what you're working on, right? How you got into it, and if there's any way that like I can help you, I'd be willing to do that. Paying it forward is what literally, this community is so small in tech and product, like around the world, not just in Silicon Valley. Word goes around, and if you have a good rep, then you're golden, right? Don't be a taker, right? Try to always give. I mean, you can't always give, but if you can give, that's usually what makes the difference.
So you would literally write that in your DM, right?
Something
You'd be
along the
like,
lines of that.
"Hey, I'm
Yeah,
Brian. I saw you are a product manager at Facebook. I would love to learn more about,
yeah.
what
A
you
lot
do
of
every
coffee
single,
dates. A
yeah.
lot of coffee dates.
Can we meet up for coffee?" Now, would you recommend, or do you think there's a difference networking face to face, like for coffee versus just getting on the phone?
Yes. At least what we're doing right now with Zoom, right? I mean, we can't
Hmm.
physically be there face to face.
Yeah.
Um, There's so one of the companies I worked at, I'm not going to give like the name of it, but it's humanizing the Internet of Things. So in this case, we're humanizing human to human relationships, right?
Yeah.
If I can put a face to the name, I'm going to remember you more, and also the things that you say, right? It's like, it's not what you say per se. It's like, how did you make me feel, right? So,
Hmm.
uh, and I don't want to jump all over the place, but essentially that's how I got my first internship slash job. Is I
Super
was
important.
told 2 times by the CEO and the CTO that they're not hiring, and by the end of the coffee conversation, so I used LinkedIn and the DMs to get the meeting, and by the end of it, I got offered an internship
And they said they weren't hiring, and you still got it, and you still
twice,
got a job.
and even during the meeting, so like 3 or 4 times. But
Oh, this is
I didn't
awesome,
make it.
Brian.
I didn't make it about me. I said, hey, um, you know, they're like, we're not hiring right now. I'm like, I totally get that, and I understand I don't have the experience level you're looking for, but this is what I like about your company, and I came prepared, right? I didn't just come with questions. Like, I did this thing that another colleague of mine did to get his job. So, take what you don't have to be reinventing the wheel, but if you see something that worked for someone else, try it, experiment, right? My friend who was also applying for PM jobs the same time as me, granted, he worked at AmericanExpress.com back in the day, but in finance, he brought something called a lean business model canvas. So it's kind of like a mapping of like, what's the value prop of the company? Who are the competitors? What's your unique value proposition? All this stuff. And then ask questions on top of that to show your curiosity and interest. Hopefully it comes across that way that you care. You're not just doing this for the sake of doing it. You're
Mm,
doing it because I'm curious. Like, I'm eager
right.
to learn more from you. And
Yeah.
maybe this is not a right now, but it could be, it's not a matter of if, but when, right? It's like, okay.
Mm.
And I said that. I said, I appreciate your time. I know you might not be hiring right now, but I would love to work for you one day, because I realized that you are making the Internet of Things, which is something very intimidating, very design friendly. But the kicker was this, like, because I didn't make it about myself, I asked the CEO, um, what made you start this company? Right. And he gets this a lot, but I somehow got it out of him. And he told me this story about, it was kind of like a Life Alert infomercial where his 85-year-old mother lives by herself, and she fell down, and for half the day she was they're alone, couldn't call for help or anything. And, this CEO is very successful. He's exited 2 to 3 times as a CEO, as a startup founder over the last 30 years. And he's like, I never want to see anyone go through what my mom did. And, I think through that conversation, he understood that I felt the same way. I don't want anyone to go through those types of pains. And I'm willing to work with him to figure that out. And it's something you can't fake, right? Either it comes through as genuine and authentic, or it's like, no, this guy's just doing this song and dance. Or this person, sorry. Yeah.
So that's awesome. Firstly, that's fire. I can like cut that up and like put that on Instagram or something. It's gonna be so great. So some key takeaways when networking, just to kind of recap for everybody, right? Don't make it about yourself.
Yeah.
Try and add value or help others. Do your research, right? Brian was talking about like coming prepared. There's so many times where I get on networking calls, right, where it's just like, "Hi, Corey, how are you? Oh, I'm great. Oh, well, I just have some questions. Like, how do you like working at whatever company? Like, how did you get to where you are?" Like, they clearly just have like generic questions, or they're making it up on the spot, or they really didn't put a whole lot of effort in. So if you are someone who can stand out and just do something different, like Brian and Brian's friend did, imagine like what the possibilities could be.
Yeah.
So that is awesome. I love that story. And was that your first official product manager?
That was my first product manager internship, which was like for 3 months, and then it turned into a job.
And
like
you got that immediately after your boot camp, or the boot camp finished?
The boot camp finished in this is July of 2015. I didn't get the internship I was searching for a couple months, so like right before Halloween of 2015.
Okay. So just because you finish the boot camp, it doesn't automatically mean you'll get a job.
I will tell you right now, and they're not going to say this, and please don't sue me, but I'm not going to give out names. And I might have already mentioned the boot camp's name, but
you already did.
Okay, cool. They know this, right? There's no hiding it. Like, it's a it depends situation. I don't fault them. I was taught well, right? But in terms of the hustler mentality, that's something that you can learn that, but hopefully you have it in you. Like, no one should be pushing you to do this. You should want it. It's that intrinsic motivation within yourself to be like, I want this job and I will do what it takes, right?
Yep.
So
simply just doing a boot camp, guys, does not automatically equate to you getting a PM role. Like Brian, it took Brian months even after finishing the boot camp, right? So you're still gonna have to hustle. You're still gonna have to keep networking, building your brand, doing projects. So like just keep that in mind. It's not just like a simple solution.
I would say especially with product, okay. I feel like engineering boot camps, you might get a shot because there's a technical aptitude to it. And if you have domain expertise, it's even better. I knew a guy who was at that same boot camp, and he eventually he got a job really fast at Crunchyroll, and then eventually Twitch, right? But he had an engineering background. I came from a background that made no sense with this role.
Okay, and this is a great pivot point too. So traditionally, most people know that here in Silicon Valley, to get a PM role, most of the time you have to have a technical background, like you were a software engineer or some equivalent, and then you eventually made a switch into product management. Now, as someone who has made that transition without that technical background, even though you kind of helped with an app startup-ish, but you weren't actually coding, right? So how would someone who doesn't have an engineering background and doesn't want to get an engineering background because they're like, coding's not for me, I can't imagine paying $1,000 to go to a coding bootcamp, how would someone without a technical background make a switch into a product manager role?
Okay, these are things I've seen other people do because obviously you kind of have an idea of how I did it now. I had a friend, I don't even know what he studied. He's a little older than me. He became a pretty good PM. His first PM job was with a YC company, a Y Combinator startup.
Oh, okay.
And then he eventually moved to Dropbox and did his own thing, right?
Okay.
It was at the peak of Uber and Lyft's emergence, and what he did was he wrote a Medium article analyzing the difference between the persona of Uber drivers versus Lyft drivers, and like why Uber or Lyft is better for drivers and which is a better user experience for customers. And he really did a detailed analysis, but digestible in terms of a Medium article. that got him enough traction to get interviews, right?
What?
Yeah. Well, this is like I want to say 2013, back in
But
the day, before I was a PM. Like, he told me his story.
that is
And I
so
was
cool.
I was floored by it because I thought that was awesome.
But he didn't have, so like when he was analyzing Uber and Lyft, he wasn't like analyzing like the back end software or like
no,
UX, whatever, because
not at all.
he has no background other than like a business background.
Probably a business background. I don't know. I don't have his
Interesting.
LinkedIn in front of me right now.
Interesting. Okay. Okay.
But it's very interesting. He had an opinion, so it's always good to have an opinion, right? But how do you back that up?
Yeah.
Having a product opinion is very important in product management. But by the way, I don't want to curse on this if it's not allowed. So you tell me right now.
I'm not sure what YouTube's stance is. I think you
Okay,
can.
so
I
I'm
think
not
you can talk.
gonna say anything. You don't want to blow smoke at people, right?
Mm,
Because it stinks, right? You don't want to blow smoke. People can smell that you're fake from a mile away, and don't do it to kiss up to somebody. But he had an opinion, and he backed it up by either doing like his own interviews or like I think he interviewed like 10 Uber and Lyft drivers each.
that is awesome. I love
Yeah,
this.
it's just a thing of like, like the investigative research process,
I love it.
right?
I love it.
And that's still valid, right? That's still part of what we do. you know.
Yeah.
But he was doing it more for the purpose of writing an analytical article about it. And he did it. It got a lot of traction. I think this was at the beginning of Medium when it first came out. So you can imagine how many people have read that. Yeah.
Okay. And then I remember earlier, and I've been saving this nugget to
Sure.
ask you about it later. You mentioned that there are folks that you know who have come from business backgrounds like yourself and switched into PM, the technical folks. And then you also mentioned sales folks who've
Yes.
switched into a
Oh,
PM background.
that one is he's one of my best buddies to this day. He and I are probably the closest person I am to that from that boot camp. He worked in sales at like a Series A or B startup, prospecting and whatnot. But sales when you're in this, and I'm trying not to go technical jargon here, in a B2B or business to business aspect where you're building software for companies to use. You sit in those meetings with product managers. You see how they're presenting, what they're saying, how they interact with the customer, and you are a huge like glue piece for all of that in terms of having a seat at the table as part of a sales team. So because you're prospecting, but you're also kind of playing the role of, for a startup of that size, a customer success manager. It's like, how can I utilize, or how can I get my customers, how can I align my customer goals with where the product vision is, right? And depending on the organization that you're in, you might have to play some of that. So he knew how to leverage that in order to get his first role, which was at Pivotal Labs, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with Pivotal Labs, but they are, in terms of the upper echelon of software consulting, they're like agile, like truly agile in practice. And that company's amazing. We were both competing for the job. He got it, but he could leverage that and tell that story.
Interesting.
Now he works
So
in
pure sales,
Mm-hmm.
just did a PM boot camp, and then like almost immediately, like he didn't have to do any side projects. He didn't have to
No,
like
not
teach
really.
himself to code or anything like that. That is incredible.
I will say this, and even he would mention it, which he's not here to say. We're all lucky, right? In some way, right? You have that connection that you built, right? He knew someone there already, and then like rekindled that relationship, and then they vouched for him to say like, hey, you should at least give him a chance. It's when he was in the interview that he shined,
right?
Because his analytics skills, right? Like, I'm not going to give the interview prompt because I know it, but it's like, if they give you this prompt, it's not the solution. It's how did you get there?
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
He can nail that. I know for sure he can nail that. So when I recant that story, I'm always in my head, I'm thinking like, I'm so proud of that guy. And he would say it to me because I'm the unconventional PM, right? It's like, hey, like I had to go through a lot of hurdles to even get that stable first job.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like, cheering your friends on for their successes, right?
That is awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
Crazy, crazy, crazy. Oh, and so I guess one thing to point out too from
Hmm.
that whole story is networking is not a silver bullet. Like it's just
No.
not like, oh, if I make 1,000 connections or I meet the CEO and he likes me, like I automatically can make this switch. No, like networking gets you the opportunity to interview when you normally wouldn't have. In the case
Hmm.
of Brian's friend, right? He doesn't have a technical background. He wanted to be a PM. He's a sales guy, but he like got the opportunity to interview. It's not a guaranteed job. He needed
Hmm.
to nail that, like, well, multiple questions, but that one especially that Brian's
Yeah.
highlighting is uh, so yeah, networking just gets your foot in the door. After that, it's your interviewing skills. So make sure you guys are honing in and practicing on interviewing because like networking is only like half the battle.
Yeah, just like from my experience, right? They were already writing me off, but it's that moment that I was able to shine was when I met them and showed them who I was as a person, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing was, and I didn't add this part of the story, is I got offered the internship with the caveat that I would meet, because they didn't have a head of product, I would meet with the VP of marketing. And if he liked me, I would get the sign off. But then they gave me a little homework assignment. And I literally, I'm not going to lie, I kind of pulled something out of thin air to talk about because it's not a domain I'm familiar with, right? And if you want, I could share what that was.
Oh yeah,
I,
please.
oh,
Yeah.
yeah, sure. So the product that we worked on, going back to that whole life alert situation, was a DIY smart home security system, right? Where you can take like for the camera, you would take a spare old smartphone and
Huh.
repurpose it as a camera in your house. And it would connect to like other sensors like door sensors, window sensors, etc., to literally create a smart home. Um, and they asked me, like, before you're meeting with this VP of marketing, uh, false positives are an issue in the house, right? In the common household. What improvement would you make, like, to solve for it? So I did a lot of research that weekend because it was on a Monday when I had to meet with this person. I was like, crap, I have nothing. I literally have nothing until 5 minutes before. I didn't have any of this written down because it was supposed to be somewhat of an informal conversation. And I was just like freaking out. I'm like, oh my gosh, I need this so bad. And then it just dawned on me, right? A lot of false positives are caused by dogs and cats. What do dogs and cats have in common? They're both four-legged creatures and they wear a collar, right?
Ah, yeah.
So I made this, like I said, hey, I don't have any research to back this up, so I'm not gonna lie. I'm just being honest with you. I only thought about this, but let me explain. That same situation, they're four-legged animals. Um, if you're able to create some type of sensor or device on on the collar of this cat or dog, it would cancel out the waves of of the system, because when you're arming the home to away,
Mm-hmm.
you don't want the motion sensor to go off and like it's just your dog or cat, right? Or you have false positives where the camera picks something up and you're like, crap, I'm getting all these notifications,
Yes, yes, yes.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and I said it's very blue sky. You don't know if you can do it, but I'm like, hey, it's just something I thought of. And then for the thought of privacy, let's say in the case of like an elderly loved one, you know, some mishap happens, and let's say they fell in the shower. You don't want to show that footage, right? It's like, well, thinking back to movies and sci-fi, it's like there's Predator, right? They're infrared. You see a
Mm.
body image, but you don't see the details.
Right, right, right.
Someone's on the floor because of the heat signature. And that technology exists already. It's just like, how can you repurpose it?
Yeah.
And they're just like, we like the way you think. When can you start? And like, I'm not technical, but I'm just like explaining myself, right? Like
Mm.
where I was coming from. So when people go into product management interviews and they get asked questions, the instinct is to just go straight to the answer. I'm like, you can't.
Yep.
It's not like that at
You
all,
can't.
but just
Yeah.
kind of a different wiring than most people are used to.
Yep, yep, yep. And I guess in terms of interview techniques, we can touch on that
Mm-hmm.
real quick. Sounds like Brian got a lot of the hypothetical or case study or
Mm-hmm.
situation-based questions where it's like,
Yeah.
imagine I hired you as a product manager
Mm-hmm.
and, X, Y, and Z happens. Tell me how you would handle this. Or I hired you and you start tomorrow and I need you to solve this problem for, false positives with our security system. Tell
Yeah.
me some ideas you would have. And Brian's point is, and this is something right that I talked about in my interviews and the mock sessions, is you don't just immediately start to solution and answer. You got to take a step back, ask some questions, get some information, and then build a plan that
Yeah.
can kind of like walk them through your thought process, because that's really
Mm-hmm.
what they care about. There's no right or wrong
Yeah.
answer. So you shouldn't just immediately dive in and think that you know how to solve this. So just wanted to call that out. So, okay, this is super, super interesting. And I feel like a lot of people are going to get some good value from it.
Great.
If you could redo your career journey, what would you do differently, if at all, right? Or you could even tell me, Corey, I literally think everything worked out exactly like how it was, and I wouldn't change anything. But like, if you could fix something, what would you have done differently?
Your proposal to both those answers would be part of it. I wouldn't change it because it makes me who I am today.
Right.
Like I wouldn't have, had I didn't go through selling vitamins and getting all those rejections, right? Because even as product people, not just when you're interviewing, but like you're on the other side of getting the no, right? Usually
Yeah.
we dish out the no's and say, hey, no, we're not doing that. It doesn't align. But when you're interviewing, you're the one possibly getting all the rejection. So having some layer of tough skin, right, thick skin to deal with is important. So I wouldn't change that aspect. But if I were to start, I didn't grow up around a lot of technical people. Like the most technical person that was in my life as a child was my uncle. He was he worked for AMD, so Advanced Micro Devices. So they make microchips. It bored the hell out of me. He took me, me and my twin brother to bring your kids to work day before he had kids. And all I remember from that experience was going to In-N-Out after. It wasn't even the microchip part of it. But I would like, had I been in that environment, you're a product of your environment, right? Had I been in that situation where like my friends were studying computer science, I had some casual friends who were, or in fact, I don't want to date myself, but back then comp sci was not as sexy. Pre-Facebook, let's put it that way. Pre-Facebook.
Yeah, I mean, even the term entrepreneur wasn't even sexy until like
Exactly.
2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah. So had I grown up like a few years later, right, and had I shown an interest, like maybe I was like not even 10 years old back in when I actually went to college and like further along, I probably would have tried learning some computer science, right? It's just people need to break down these barriers to realize that things are not as intimidating as they seem until you actually dip your foot in the water. And that's for anything.
Yeah.
Right?
Would you say you're an extroverted person or more of an introverted person?
It depends. It
It
totally
depends.
depends on the situation. There's days
So
I don't want to talk to people.
you're like an extroverted introvert or like an
I'm
introverted
a
extrovert?
ambivert. I'm an ambivert.
Ambivert.
I would
Okay.
say I'm a more extroverted introvert, if anything.
Extroverted introvert. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And I just wanted to like call
Sure.
that out too, right? Because people when they hear your story, it's heavy networking based. Like a lot of the
Yeah.
things as like as I've been highlighting from Brian's story is networking based, right? He got this app opportunity, basically like his first pseudo PM role in it was Canada or something, right? You said?
It by happenstance, yeah, like it was something
Yeah.
I worked on in
Yeah,
Canada.
but that was through networking, right?
Yeah.
And then he got his official internship after the boot camp. Basically, he networked his butt off, and
Yeah.
he impressed the CEO and VP of marketing. So Brian's story is heavily networking, which is normal for people who've done career switches without going to school. But he's naturally an introvert, or extroverted introvert. But
Yeah.
at the core, he's an introvert. So like the excuse of I'm an introvert, Corey, like I couldn't possibly do as much networking as like you want me to.
So I'm gonna try to add something to this
Yeah,
because
no, please.
I was way awkward and shy like until like maybe after college. Um,
Everyone is, even like your
no,
first
but
networking like call. Mine was terrible. I remember like I read a script. I literally was like, "Hi, my name is Corey."
no, but in general, I'm just talking about like I didn't even really date like until like after college. That's how introverted I was. Like it gave me a lot of social anxiety, and I still have some remnants of that today. But one of my mentors, who was not even in tech or more of a business sense, he said, "Okay, I said earlier, like, what are your strengths, right? But also on the flip side of that, what are your weaknesses?" And I realized, like, I have anxiety when I talk to certain people because, like, I don't know if they'll like me. And it's not always being liked. And it's still today, it still gets to me a little bit because naturally, you want people like you and get along with you.
Right.
But you're not always going to win that battle. There are people who just might not like you, and that's how it is.
That's life.
You're not there to always make friends, right? But thing that he proposed to me was like, how is this serving you right now? What you're doing, the way you're going about it, like by not doing things, right? It's that Michael Jordan quote. It's like, or Wayne Gretzky, I always forget, right? It's like you missed 99 or 100% of the shots
you never take.
Yeah, exactly. So if you shoot your shot and it fails, well, that's just one thing on the blip, right? And you look at all the success stories of the past from I think Starbucks, KFC for sure. The Colonel went through many obstacles before getting that yes, right? And now look where KFC is today, right? Those are success stories, right? And you have to kind of intrinsically put that within yourself and realize like that could be me, but if I don't even try, then I've already failed.
Wise words. And were you like purposely strategic in picking the jobs that you were doing next to set
No,
you up for
no.
these? Okay, no, that's awesome. I think that's
Yeah.
even funnier. It's kind
That's what's
of
funnier.
it reminds me of Slumdog Millionaire, right? He wins the show by happenstance because he just so happened to remember that statue that was on the top of the hill when he
Yeah.
was like running through the favelas or whatever, and then he
Yeah.
like answered the question. So it's almost kind of like that where sometimes life just has a crazy way of working itself out where you're able to get and pick up these skill sets from
Yeah.
seemingly random jobs
Yeah.
that ultimately can make you so marketable and make you so successful in a totally different field. But I do think like how you write the resume to
Mm-hmm.
highlight those skill sets, and also you're going to have to explain to a person when you
Mm-hmm.
meet them for coffee or on the Zoom chat, right?
Yeah.
Like, hey, if you looked at my LinkedIn, it's crazy. But let me help you make
Yeah.
sense of my background, right?
I'm not gonna lie, Corey. I had a lot of help. Um, it takes a team to sometimes, your network and close friends who were PMs, right? Because there was a time where I was looking for work again, and it was very intimidating because like all I knew was this experience from this one company. So like, what do I need to do next? And you had to like kind of reset your mindset. Um, and they helped with that. Albert helped tremendously with my resume, along with other people who just volunteered. Like I was like, hey, I need help. And then that same mindset of giving back. Well, I also gave back to those same people who helped me, right? I never knew how I would catch that one day, but it's like, hey, do you need practicing with interviews? Like, I'm down to help you with that.
Right, I
Or
got
if
you.
you just want to talk, right? Or come to this networking event with me, like we'll just chat out with people. I didn't need to go, right? But I wanted to because I wanted to, show my respect and pay it forward. But also, like, you never know who you're gonna meet, and I always open myself up to possibility. And serendipitously, so far, it's worked out. It's not always going to work out for that, for everybody, but be open, right?
Yeah, it's like that term, luck is where hard work meets timing, or
Exactly.
something like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, you just have to put yourself out there, and you never really know what can manifest itself when you're taking these risks or meeting these people. But in Brian's case, it's giving back or not focusing on you. It's
Mm-hmm.
always like me, right? Like how do I get into, working at this company? How do I become a product manager? Like what can I, right? As opposed to what Brian was doing, which is like, thank you so much. Like, how can I help you, if at all? And sometimes you just ask, right? There's no like
Yeah.
magical thing you can give to everybody.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just say like, I really appreciate it. Like, what can I do for you?
And to go off of that, being a product manager is all about being a servant leader. Those who fail that and make it about themselves usually are not good PMs. And that's definitely one thing I've observed is like, uh, we was it when the product is successful, it's a team win. When the product's not successful, it's
It's the
generally a
PM's fault.
reflection on the PM. Usually,
Yeah.
not always. I'll save that story for another day, but it's not always the case, especially if leadership knows like there are things out of your control. But generally, like it's a mindset that I've indoctrinated into myself, and I still believe in that. But there are times when it's not necessarily your fault, and you need to let that go too.
Right.
So it's always it depends, but generally, don't make it about you. Try to see how you can be the glue and help your team members perform the way they need to perform, right? To do the thing that they need to do. If it's engineering, if it's design, if it's just taking time to communicate more, they might find you a nuisance, But if you lack communication, that is inexcusable.
Oh, key success factors for everyone watching too.
Yeah.
How important would you say was doing that PM boot camp?
Oh, crucial.
Crucial.
I would not be here without it. Even to this day, I keep in touch with a lot of the people there, and uh, one of my mentors is like, I've learned so much from him. The one acronym I always tell people that even I mentor like now is this acronym of no shame. So no, right? But shame stands for should have already mastered everything. And we have this mentality of like, oh, but I need to like know this. Like I need to know SQL and know that. I'm like, you don't, right? Like you would already be in that place. But the thing is like, you need to let that go, right? No one expects you to know everything. They're hiring you on hopefully like sometimes it's your experience, but it's more for your potential, right? Where you can go because your ceiling is a lot higher than the floor.
Okay. So I guess, would you say doing the PM bootcamp was a critical component in helping you make this switch?
Yes, it gave me the foundation and like being able to talk the lingo and at least that mindset of like how I need to ask questions.
Perfect. Okay. So now to build on top of that,
Sure.
I remember earlier in the call, Brian mentioned that he didn't have to, but he luckily had the app that he was building right on FileMaker, and he was able to show that when he was interviewing to get into that PM bootcamp. So he even had to do like pseudo PM work before he could go into the bootcamp, which was a critical component for him to be a PM later. So there's like these, it's like a ladder, right, and steps. So just keep that in mind, right? Like now that you know doing the boot camp is going to be super helpful and beneficial for you, you can't just apply and then get in, right? You're going to have to also do some work to make you ready to apply for the boot camp. So there's like steps to that as well.
I mean, every boot camp's different, so I can't say. I do know, I'm not going to name names. There are certain boot camps that prefer technical people because for them it's like the metric, right? Like, oh, we converted this person into a product manager. I'm like, well, they kind of had a leg up, right? Because they were already tangentially in that industry.
Yeah. Because they want to put it on their website, right? It's like
exactly
95% of our graduates become product managers or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. But they were probably already working in tech, which helps a lot. In my case, I wasn't really. So.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that's pretty much everything I had on my end that I thought to cover. Is there anything I guess you wanted to share? Anything you want to get off your chest? Any great insights from Brian?
Not that I could think of. Do you have any for me that, or any questions for me that maybe could stir some memory of mine that maybe some knowledge of wisdom I can share? Like, I don't know. I think I've shared a lot, but
I think one thing that was super interesting is you talked a lot about your inner circle or your mentors, right?
Yeah.
How did you, trying to word it so it makes sense. How did you convince certain people to become your mentors or to quote unquote coach you?
Some of these mentors were my instructors at the boot camp, so naturally they were kind of in this situation. But that question always sounds weird. It's like, can you be my mentor, or like, will you be my mentor?
But I'm sure like everyone who does the boot camp could have asked them to be their mentor, but they can't be a mentor for everyone.
Yeah.
Right? So they still pick you to mentor.
I did seek them out. That was on me. I sought them out. Like there are things that I always, I think of myself as a lifelong student. And the moment I start getting cocky, I mean, it happens sometimes, right? Where I start thinking, I know this stuff. It's like, okay, you need to let that go quick. That arrogance will kill you, right? Because it's like that. Is it dopamine? Like you get this huge surge of like, it's not something I like. It's not a flattering thing for me. I mean, it's great to have confidence, but arrogance is repulsive.
Yeah.
So I would seek them out, and I realized like, what do they know that I don't know, and how do I connect the dots, right? Like there are things like more technical things, like if I wanted to wireframe, and there was a project that I did, and I'm like, hey, mentor, or I'm not going to say their name, but it's like, I really don't know how to go about this. Like I know kind of what I want. Like, what are some tips that you have? And it was as simple as screenshotting something changing it up in Sketch at that time. Like people use Figma now, but like, Sketch, and then like programming it into InVision so it looks like the real thing, right? Because like it's basically like Photoshop, and then you plug in these hot buttons so that you can get a link to a fake website or like an app. People just press exactly what you want, guide them through the user journey. It's like, damn, it looks like the real thing. I'm not artistic. I cannot draw to save my life. That's why I don't think I would be a good designer. Like there are pixel perfect designers that can literally utilize software. I'm neither of those things. So it's like, what little hacks can I learn? And he taught me certain things, and I thought it was really interesting. It's like, stop me if I'm going to go too far off the deep end here, but it's like inspecting the HTML elements, manipulating that a little bit, because it basically takes what's in your browser and just alters it a little bit, and screenshot that, right? It doesn't change the code. It's just like, hey, I can fiddle around with this and make these little tweaks. And it's kind of like reverse A/B testing something.
Oh,
so,
yeah. I get you.
Yeah. So like if you want a different rendering of something, like you can manipulate your browser's DOM to do that, and then just screenshot it, put it into another piece of software that can program, like, highlight this button. When I click here, it goes to the screen, right? To see if that experience works. And I was like, I didn't know how to do any of that, right? So I was like, hey, like, thank you, right? And that same skill set was applied for when I actually interviewed at other companies. Like, you just think about the small little, one huge piece of knowledge, or that I want to endow your audience with, is keep it simple. It's always the simple tweaks that can make, you want to do simple as possible for highest amount of impact. Right? When I was interviewing for a company, and they gave me a prompt about Twitter's group chat, right? Which, yeah, is an old feature. So like a few years back, people don't usually DM on Twitter, right? You were able to, but you can DM in a group chat. And I'm like, I need to find some glaring hole to make a feature improvement on, right? The whole thing was, how do you edit the participants in a chat without deleting the whole chat and starting over? Like if I added too many people. And all I did was Photoshop out, or like Sketch the menu, and put one extra entry, which is edit participants, and then like plus or minus these people. Right? And it was like, okay, now I'm not abandoning your app to do a group chat. I'm not going to Facebook Messenger or whatever. I'm keeping it all within Twitter, right? This isn't for Twitter, but they use this as a prompt. And I didn't get the job, but even the PM who interviewed me, she's like, I really like what you did there. You didn't tweak the UI much, and it was like drastically improved this
functionality.
I'm like, yeah, that's what I was going for. Simple as changing a button.
Right? Yeah.
Because I would, try to get people to play around with it too. Like, what do you think? Right? The first version is like, this is frustrating. It's like, okay. I mean, it's serial A/B testing, which is something else. But what I'm saying is like, it's those little investigative experiments. And like, if you can make that little tweak for the most impactful change, like, do it.
Yeah. Okay. KISS. Keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Brian. I guess we can wrap up our recording and podcast here now. And so thank you so much. Thank you everyone for listening and staying through the whole thing. If you did, this is our Life Switch podcast. Hopefully we're able to provide some inspiration and information to folks looking to make a career journey or switch. And we'll see you guys in the next episode.
If people want to reach out to me.
Yeah.
Well, on LinkedIn, it's Brian, Brian, and then I put my middle initials, HK Lee, because the most famous Brian Lee is the guy who started Honest Group and a few other very common names.
I can put up like a I guess I'll put like your LinkedIn profile URL or something. I'll just annotate that at the end here for the viewers and stuff, so they can reach out if they have questions.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you, Corey.